What looks like choice isn't really choice. Former employees say most of the flavor, portions, and even how fresh your meal feels are decided before you ever point at the menu. That's why different dishes can taste weirdly similar, why portions feel inconsistent, and why switching orders doesn't always change the outcome. Once you see what's actually being controlled, the menu starts raising questions it never had to answer before. This isn't a scandal, it's more useful than that. By the end, you'll know what ex-employees point out, what the paperwork quietly confirms, and how to order with intention instead of guesswork. The sweet glaze blueprint. At first glance, every entree in the hot case looks different. There are peppers and onions, mushrooms and zucchini, glossy shrimp, and dark caramelized sauces. From the outside, it feels like a buffet of completely separate recipes. When you read the ingredient documents, though, you notice that many of these dishes share the same backbone. Items like black pepper chicken, broccoli beef, and eggplant tofu are described as using a proprietary sauce, whose main ingredients are water, sugar, soy sauce, salt, and spices. The names change, the vegetables change, but the structure is repeating like a template. Even the plant-based entrees that were later promoted to vegan status after pressure from animal advocacy groups, such as chow mein, eggplant tofu, vegetable spring rolls, and the mixed greens option, rely on similar blends of sugar, oil, soy sauce, and starch to deliver that same familiar punch. The promise to the diner is variety. The reality is that many of the entrees are different costumes worn by the same flavor system. That is not automatically sinister. It is one way to make sure every location can get close to the same result with different workers and shifting ingredient quality. The consequence for you, though, is that switching from one saucy favorite to another often does not change much. You think you have found a lighter alternative, but you are still eating a dish whose calories, sugar, and sodium are being driven more by glaze than by vegetables or protein. So when you're standing at the counter, it helps to ignore the names and look at the food itself. Thick, glossy sauces that pool at the bottom of the tray usually tell you more than the description ever will. If it looks heavily lacquered, chances are you're still in the same sugar, soy sauce, and starch-driven system, even if the menu name sounds lighter or more responsible. The more you listen to former workers, the more you realize the real control is happening long before anything hits a wok. What ex-employees actually talk about. People who say they used to work in these kitchens almost never claim that nothing is cooked fresh. They talk about a different kind of truth, that the most important decisions are made upstream, in centralized recipes, prep routines, and systems that leave very little room for improvisation. A lot of the prep is repetitive. Proteins arrive trimmed or pre-marinated. Vegetables come in geared toward quick chopping and fast stir-frying. Sauces are produced to be poured, tossed, and brought to the same finish every time. Employees describe learning timing and technique, but not being invited to change the recipes themselves. That picture lines up neatly with how the company tells its own story. The founders are immigrants who turned one family restaurant into a massive operation by obsessing over consistency and data. Official case studies highlight how early on they introduced computerized point-of-sale systems and used detailed sales information to refine menus and portions across hundreds and then thousands of locations. The promise is reliability. No matter where you walk in, you can expect the same texture on the chicken, the same level of crunch in the vegetables, the same sweetness in the sauce. The reality behind that promise, according to many former workers, is a production line that feels much closer to an engineered system than a traditional improvisational kitchen. For customers, the consequence is subtle. When the food is good, it is consistently good. When a batch misses, it often misses in predictable ways, over-sauced, held too long, or portioned a little short. If freshness matters to you, pause for a moment before ordering and watch how the line is moving. Items that are actively being cooked and replenished tend to taste cleaner and more balanced than ones that have been sitting under heat for a while. Timing your order around what's turning over can quietly make a bigger difference than switching dishes. You might assume the biggest secret is an ingredient, but a lot of frustration centers on something much simpler: how much actually ends up in the box, the portion and price question. Every guest walking up to the steam table is doing math without really thinking about it. How full will this box be? How long will it keep me satisfied? And is the price on the menu board worth what I see in the tray? Official marketing language emphasizes value plates, combo choices, and the ability to customize. But if you dig into the nutrition information and listen to longtime customers, a pattern emerges. A single entree of that famous chicken can carry over 500 calories. and somewhere near 800 to 900 milligrams of sodium. Yet visually, it does not take up much of the container. Sides like fried rice or noodles add calories quickly, but guests often ask for more protein to feel like they are getting their money's worth. Online discussions have been full of people comparing scoops and complaining that two guests in the same line can walk away with very different amounts of food for the same price, depending on who is behind the counter and how full the pan is at that moment. Some describe it as a ladle lottery, where timing determines whether your plate feels generous or light. The company's own case study material suggests why this tension exists. This brand has invested heavily in systems to minimize waste and tighten margins, using point-of-sale data and security tools to control losses and standardize portioning across thousands of transactions. That is good business, but it means every extra scoop is working against an algorithm in the background. The consequence for diners is that value feels inconsistent. One visit leaves you impressed by the amount of food. The next visit, you are staring at more styrofoam than entree and wondering what changed. If quantity matters to you, it's usually fine to politely ask for the scoops to be even, or for both entrees to look similar in the box. In practice, most servers will adjust upward rather than remove food that's already there. It's a small moment of communication that often makes the portion feel fair instead of random. And once you are paying attention to how tightly portions are controlled, it is natural to wonder how tightly everything else is controlled, especially the parts that people argue about the most. But before we get into that specific ingredient everyone argues about, it's worth pausing for a second. You've already seen how former workers describe the workflow, how the ingredient lists line up, and how the menu has shifted when enough customers pushed back. None of that required outrage. It just required looking at what's publicly available and connecting the dots. So here's the question for the comments. What's one item from this menu that you stopped ordering over time, even though you couldn't quite explain why at first? And if this kind of breakdown is useful, like and subscribe. This channel focuses on California chains and fast food using receipts, not rants, so you can keep the comfort and skip the regret. Because the next section tackles the ingredient everyone fixates on, but not in the way you might expect. The monosodium glutamate. Question and what actually matters. Walk into almost any Chinese American fast food spot, and someone at some table will eventually bring up monosodium glutamate. The ingredient has been demonized, defended, misunderstood, and meme-ified for decades. This chain sits right inside that conversation. Public statements associated with the brand say the company does not add monosodium glutamate to its entrees or sides, and does not buy from suppliers who add it, while acknowledging that glutamate occurs naturally in ingredients such as soy sauce and certain seasonings. At the same time, nutrition experts point out that many fast food dishes here and elsewhere still land very high in sodium overall, sometimes pushing close to or beyond a full day's recommended limit in a single entree, even if no extra monosodium glutamate is sprinkled in. The promise to consumers is reassurance. We are not adding this controversial flavor booster on top of everything else. The reality is that the food can still be a salt and sugar bomb, powered more by soy sauce, marinades, and concentrated glazes than by any one specific additive. For diners who truly are sensitive to monosodium glutamate, the company's own wording is important. Natural glutamates will still be present, and cross-contact is hard to avoid in a busy kitchen where sauces share pans and utensils. The everyday consequence for most guests, though, is simpler. They may walk away feeling puffy, thirsty, or wiped out from a combination of high sodium and fast-digesting carbs and sugar, not from a mysterious secret powder. Rather than fixating on whether something contains added monosodium glutamate, it's usually more useful to compare sodium and sugar across entrees and sides using the nutrition information the company already provides. Those numbers tend to explain how you'll actually feel after the meal, far better than focusing on one ingredient by itself. While that debate dominated headlines, comment sections, and late-night arguments at the table, something quieter was happening in the background. A steady pressure campaign, driven by organized feedback and volume rather than noise, was already reshaping what actually showed up on the menu in concrete ways. Vegan pushback, cross-contamination, and transparency. For a long time, guests who avoided meat could not really rely on this menu at all. Even items that looked plant-forward on the surface were often built on animal-based foundations. Vegetable dishes were flavored with chicken broth. Noodles and stir-fries picked up meat-based seasonings during prep. From the outside, a bowl of greens or noodles looked safe. behind the scenes, it often wasn't. That gap between appearance and reality became a pressure point. Animal advocacy organizations and plant-based diners began calling it out, not with vague complaints, but with volume. Thousands of messages, emails, and public comments pushed the company to clarify what was actually in the food and to make changes that went beyond marketing language. Over time, that pressure added up. Eventually, the restaurant group announced that several items had been reformulated to be fully vegan at the ingredient level. Dishes like eggplant tofu, chow mein, vegetable spring rolls, and a mixed greens side were updated so they no longer contained meat, dairy, or egg products in their official recipes. On paper, this was a meaningful shift. For the first time, guests who avoided animal products could point to specific menu items and say, "At least the ingredients line up with my values." The promise was straightforward: no hidden animal-based ingredients baked into the recipe itself. But the fine print mattered just as much as the headline. Alongside those announcements, the company was clear that all food is still prepared in shared kitchens, using shared woks, shared utensils, and shared oil. Nothing is isolated, nothing is sealed off. Plant-based advocacy groups acknowledge this openly, reminding diners that even with vegan recipes, cross-contamination is likely in a high-volume kitchen built for speed and consistency. For ethical vegans, that becomes a personal calculation. Some are comfortable with ingredient-level compliance, even if the cooking environment is shared. Others are not. For people with severe food allergies, the issue is more concrete. Shared equipment and oil mean this is not a controlled environment, no matter how clear the ingredient list looks on paper. The real-world consequence is mixed. The menu is more inclusive than it used to be, but it is not universally safer. The transparency itself becomes the most important receipt here. Instead of quietly letting assumptions form, this chain is telling guests exactly where the limits are. The line between dishes exists on the menu board, but in practice, it blurs in the kitchen. Now, if you avoid animal products by preference or ethics, the reformulated vegan recipes may work for you, as long as you're comfortable with shared preparation. If you have serious allergies or medical reasons to avoid certain ingredients entirely, it's safer to treat this kitchen as high risk and rely on the official allergen charts before ordering. To understand why some changes appear quickly while others seem to stall for years, you have to stop looking at the counter or the kitchen. The real answers live further upstream, where data, sourcing, and long-term planning quietly decide what evolves and what stays frozen in place, how the system is really built. This company did not stumble into success. It grew out of a family-run, full-service restaurant in Southern California into a group that now oversees thousands of locations across the United States of America and overseas. That kind of growth does not happen on vibes, it happens on systems. The co-founders have backgrounds in mathematics, engineering, and computer science. Over time, they used those skills to bring early computerized order systems into their restaurants, long before that was standard in the industry. Those point-of-sale tools helped them track what sold, when it sold, how much ingredient was needed, and where waste or theft might be happening. Once you have that kind of data, menus stop being guesswork. You can see which dishes drive repeat business and which ones drag down margins. You can test new flavors in one region, then scale them up or quietly remove them with almost surgical precision if they do not perform. At the same time, centralized ingredient sourcing lets you standardize not just flavor, but cost. Using similar sauce bases across multiple dishes means one large production run can support an entire menu, making supply chains simpler and more profitable. The official ingredient sheets show how often that proprietary sauce note appears, paired again and again with water, sugar, soy sauce, salt, and spices. The promise in all this is stability, franchise-like consistency without giving up corporate control. The reality for diners is that what feels like a casual stir-fry joint is really a finely tuned operation where your plate is the last step of a very long, very calculated pipeline. The consequence is that change is slower and more deliberate than some guests expect. Your local staff may be kind, fast, and genuinely trying to help, but they are not rewriting recipes or deciding how much sugar belongs in the orange sauce. Those decisions are made far away, and they move only when enough data and pressure line up. When frustration comes from the food itself, it helps to aim that feedback toward corporate channels and menu feedback tools rather than the person behind the counter. The real decisions about recipes, portions, and sourcing lie much higher up, and guest data is one of the main signals this company uses when deciding what changes and what stays. Now that you have seen the machinery behind it, the familiar argument about whether this food is authentic or fake starts to look very different. Authenticity Comfort and what this food really is. Some diners will swear this is not real Chinese food at all. Others grew up with these flavors and think of them as their personal version of comfort cooking. The brand itself leans into a hybrid identity, describing its menu as American Chinese, food shaped by immigrant families, adapting heritage recipes to American ingredients and tastes. Chefs associated with the company have explained in interviews that the goal has never been to copy regional dishes from specific provinces exactly. Instead, the aim has been to translate certain flavors, textures, and techniques into a format that works in a mall, an airport, or a freeway exit with a constant rush of people who may not have grown up with Chinese cuisine at all. The promise is accessibility. Someone who has never eaten anything beyond basic takeout can try this food without feeling intimidated. The reality is that to stay accessible, recipes are constantly tuned in favor of sweetness, crispiness, and saltiness, because those are the flavors that reliably get new guests to nod and say, "This is good," on the first bite. The consequence is that subtlety often loses. Bitter greens, complex broths, and gentler flavors that define many traditional dishes rarely survive the test of mass appeal and holding time under heat lamps. If you want to use this place as a gateway into broader Chinese cuisine, it helps to think of the menu as a starting point rather than a destination. Pay attention to the flavors you enjoy here, then look for smaller California restaurants that focus on specific regions or styles once you know what resonates with you. And with all that context, the question that really matters is no longer, is this food authentic, but knowing how it works and how to use it in your real life without regret, how to order without getting played. The simplest way to think about this chain is to ask yourself one question before you even join the line. Am I here for comfort or for fuel? They are not the same thing, and this menu is built to sell you comfort first. If you are here for comfort, own it. Order the sweet, sticky chicken, get the noodles, enjoy the crunchy bits, and accept that you are cashing in a treat. The trade-off is heavy, but it is honest if you see it clearly. If you are here for fuel, you have to work with the menu instead of letting it work on you. The ingredient sheets and nutrition charts make it clear that vegetable-heavy options, grilled proteins without breading, and lighter sauces can bring calories and sodium down drastically without turning the meal into sadness. Start by picking a base that is mostly vegetables rather than fried rice or thick noodles. Then choose an entree where you can see the actual meat and vegetables rather than just a uniform shell of batter and glaze. Finally, ask politely for light sauce or sauce on the side, so you decide how sweet and salty the plate becomes. For guests who avoid animal products, lean on the officially vegan options, but remember the shared equipment warning. For anyone dealing with blood pressure issues or heart concerns, treat high-sodium entrees as once-in-a-while choices, and use the chain's own nutrition calculator to spot lower sodium combinations. The consequence of ordering with this framework is simple. The meal starts to behave the way you intended. Comfort feels deliberate, not accidental. Lighter meals feel genuinely lighter, not secretly loaded with hidden sugar and salt. So the next time you go, it helps to follow a simple three-step approach. First, start with a vegetable-heavy side instead of noodles or fried rice. Second, choose one entree that isn't breaded, where you can actually see the protein and vegetables. Third, add one saucy favorite in a smaller portion, almost like a side dish. That balance keeps the flavor satisfying while dialing back the part of the system that often leaves people feeling misled. Because once you have seen behind the curtain like this, the only question left is whether you use that knowledge or let the steam table make your choices for you. There's a difference between being surprised by what's in the box and choosing the trade-off you're actually getting. That's the real takeaway here. This place is built on a clear promise: hot food, fast, familiar, and nearly identical wherever you go. Behind that promise is a quiet system of standardized sauces, tight prep rules, and data-driven decisions that make each plate predictable instead of mysterious. Once you see that system, the so-called ex-employee secrets stop sounding dramatic and start looking like details that were always visible on the label and nutrition panel. If this breakdown changed how you see that tray, leave a comment answering one question: which dish do you now treat as an occasional indulgence? And which order actually works when you want a normal, no-regret meal? And if this kind of clarity helps, like and subscribe. This channel breaks down California chains using receipts and patterns, so you can order smarter before you pay. Next, we're looking at another spot that sells fresh and simple, but tells a more complicated story once you read the fine print.